Madison Brooks didn't expect her name to make headlines. She wasn't trying to be brave or controversial. All she wanted was a simple checking account. At just 14 years old, this polite, bright African-American girl had planned everything down to the detail: the paperwork, the savings, the questions she would ask. But that afternoon inside First Liberty Bank in downtown Chicago, Madison was taught a brutal truth. Even when you follow all the rules, some people will only see your skin. She walked in holding her future in an envelope. She walked out in handcuffs. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. It started like any ordinary day, but the kind of ordinary that sometimes masks a brewing storm. The sun was out, Lake Michigan sparkled nearby, and Chicago's Loop bustled with energy. Madison had dressed carefully in her school uniform from Winfield Charter Academy. Her shoes shined, her hair in neat braids. Her mother had taught her that preparation was a form of self-respect. She carried a canvas backpack with laminated documents: birth certificate, student ID, school records, even printed savings statements from the same bank she was walking into. And in her hand, she clutched an envelope holding $950 in crisp bills, birthday money saved from relatives, neighbors, and family friends over the past 2 years. The bank's marble lobby hummed with quiet elegance. Suited professionals scrolled through phones. A man in a navy blazer talked about interest rates. The smell of fresh espresso from the corner cafe drifted through the air. Madison stood on tiptoe to see over the line and smiled to herself. She wasn't just opening an account. She was taking her first real step into adulthood. But sometimes the world doesn't meet a young black girl with encouragement. Sometimes it meets her with suspicion. When Barbara Langston, a 47-year-old white bank manager with a pinched voice and tighter smile, spotted Madison alone, her eyes narrowed. She didn't see a responsible teenager. She didn't see a top student with a 4.0 GPA and a head for numbers. She saw a problem. Someone out of place. And when Madison stepped forward to say, "Good afternoon, I'd like to open a checking account," Barbara didn't smile. She didn't say welcome. Instead, she looked at the envelope of cash like it was radioactive. "Young lady," she said, her voice as cold as the granite counter, "where did you get all that money?" At first, Madison thought it was a joke. She explained, politely, that it was birthday money from her aunts and grandmother. She pulled out the card her grandma had written in loopy cursive, with a note that read, "For your future. Love, Nana." She offered to show her ID, her school letter, even the savings passbook with the First Liberty logo. Barbara never touched the documents. She called them questionable. Then, without asking another question, she picked up the phone and dialed the police. "I have a young suspect here," she said flatly, loud enough for other customers to hear. "Possible fraud, maybe stolen funds. She's acting evasive." Evasive? Madison hadn't moved. She stood rooted to the tile floor, stunned, her fingers still holding out her school ID. All she had done was walk in, prepared, respectful, and alone. But in Barbara's mind, that was enough to trigger fear, or maybe not fear, maybe something worse. Assumption. Bias. A quiet kind of hate passed off as policy. The next moments felt like a slow-motion nightmare. 2 officers arrived, their boots echoing in the lobby. Madison tried to speak, but her words tumbled out in panic. She begged them to check her documents, to let her call her mother. She said her mom banked there too, that she was just trying to do what other kids did every day. But they weren't listening, because in that room, her innocence didn't matter. Her voice didn't matter. and for a terrifying moment she didn't matter. The handcuffs were cold. The lobby went silent. And somewhere, just blocks away, her mother's phone buzzed with a single desperate message. "Mom, they called the cops. I'm scared. Please come." What Madison didn't know, what no one in that bank could have guessed, was that her mother wasn't just another parent. She was Dr. Vanessa L. Brooks, CEO of Brooks Financial Holdings, and a woman with the power to turn an entire institution upside down. And she was already on her way. Barbara Langston had been a fixture at First Liberty Bank for over 2 decades. In her carefully curated world of mahogany desks, pressed suits, and whispered conversations about mortgages and investments, she fancied herself a gatekeeper of order. She had earned her title, Regional Assistant Branch Manager, not through kindness, but precision. She knew the policy book better than her own wedding vows and followed it with a zeal that often blurred the line between diligence and judgment. And then Madison Brooks walked in. Barbara spotted her the moment she crossed the polished threshold. Alone, young, black. That was all it took. Her eyes locked on Madison like a security camera tracking a potential. Her lips tightened, just slightly. Not enough for most to notice, but unmistakable for those who've lived through it. Madison, meanwhile, stood at the end of the customer service line, straight-backed, holding her envelope of money with both hands like it was precious. She had rehearsed this moment with her mom the night before. They'd practiced what she'd say, how to stay calm, how to ask for a youth checking account with no monthly fee. It was supposed to be empowering, a rite of passage. She didn't notice Barbara watching her, not yet. A young teller, Elena Martinez, no more than 25, with tired eyes and a kind smile, called her over. "Hi there," she said, smiling. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to open my first checking account, please," Madison said, her voice steady and hopeful. "I have all my paperwork and some money to deposit." Elena nodded and gestured to the chair across from her. Madison sat, carefully setting the envelope on the desk, then unzipped her backpack to pull out her documents. Elena took the birth certificate and student ID, glancing them over. Everything was proceeding just fine, until Barbara Langston stepped out from her glass-walled office. She crossed the floor with the slow deliberation of someone who wanted to be seen. Her heels clicked against the floor like a metronome. Customers lowered their voices. Employees straightened their postures. And Madison, without knowing why, sat up straighter too. "Is there a problem here?" Barbara asked, her voice dipped in sugary professionalism, the kind you'd expect from a hostess at a country club, not a woman about to accuse a child of a crime. Elena glanced up, puzzled. "No, ma'am, she's here to open a youth account. Everything looks in order." Barbara's eyes dropped to the envelope. "Cash?" "Yes," Madison said, sitting taller. $950, from my birthday and savings." Barbara's brow arched, not dramatically, just enough to signal that something wasn't quite right. "That's a lot of money for someone your age." Madison nodded politely, unaware of the danger in the air. "My grandma gives me a big gift every year, and I've been saving since I was 12. Barbara turned to Elena. "I'll take this from here." It wasn't a request. Elena hesitated, just briefly, before standing up and nodding. Madison offered a nervous smile, unsure why things had shifted. Barbara sat down across from her and folded her hands on the desk like she was about to begin an interrogation. Her tone remained even, but her eyes had turned sharp. "Tell me again where this money came from." Madison repeated what she'd said, slowly, respectfully. She even pulled out the birthday card from her grandmother, the same one she'd shown Elena, with a $100 bill taped inside and a handwritten message. For college, for books, or for whatever you dream next. Love, Nana. Barbara didn't look at the card. Instead, she picked up the envelope and began flipping through the bills, tens, 20s, a few hundreds, as if she expected them to vanish or reveal something criminal. "Young lady," she said, "I've worked in banking for 22 years. I know when something doesn't add up. A minor walking in with nearly $1,000 in cash? Forgive me if I find that suspicious." That word, suspicious. It landed like a slap. Madison blinked. "But I have all my documents." "I'm not interested in documents you printed at home," Barbara replied, waving toward the laminated ID. "Anyone can fake a student card or make up bank statements." Madison swallowed hard, confused. "You can call my mom. She's a customer here too. Her name is Vanessa Brooks." Barbara smiled then, a small, cruel thing. "Vanessa Brooks?" she said, like it was a punchline. "Nice try. Sit tight." And just like that, she picked up her office phone and dialed security. "This is Langston at Customer Service 3. I have a young girl here, possibly using false identification, attempting to deposit large sums of cash. I'd like backup, and I'm calling the authorities." Madison sat frozen. The floor under her chair felt suddenly too wide, too open. "But I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Barbara didn't even look at her. That's what they all say. At the front of the bank, a gray-haired couple had paused at the ATM. They were watching now, subtle but attentive. A mother holding her toddler turned her stroller around and began walking away. An older black man in a navy pea coat narrowed his eyes, taking in the scene, but stayed silent. Madison's heart thundered. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "you don't have to do this. Just let me call my mom. She'll explain everything." Barbara leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "Or maybe you're part of something bigger, a scheme. They send in kids like you because you seem innocent. But I see through it. Kids like you." That was the moment Madison knew. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about protocol. This was about who she was and who Barbara had decided she must be. Outside, sirens echoed faintly. Not hers, not yet, just part of city life. But inside, the air felt like it was being squeezed from the room. Madison's fingers, still resting on her school ID, began to shake. Then, as Barbara turned to grab her phone again, Madison quietly pulled out her own, slipping it beneath the table and typing a message through blurry vision. "Mom, they think I'm stealing. Please come fast. I'm scared." She hit send just before Barbara's voice rose again. "Young lady, hand over that phone. You're not allowed to make calls during an investigation." Investigation? She wasn't even old enough to drive. And yet, she was being treated like a criminal in a bank she had grown up walking past. A bank that, unbeknownst to her, her own mother partly owned. Madison didn't know that help was already on the way. Not in sirens, but in high heels and Italian leather. Because across the river, in a glass tower overlooking the skyline, Dr. Vanessa Brooks had just stood up from her boardroom chair, eyes locked on her daughter's text. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She simply turned to her executive team and said, "This meeting is over." Someone just made the costliest mistake of their career. And with that, the clock started ticking. Not for Madison, but for Barbara Langston. The click of Barbara Langston's heels echoed sharply as she turned away from the desk. Her voice, once tight with practiced professionalism, had morphed into something unmistakably self-righteous. Louder now, edged with authority and disdain. She didn't see a scared teenager. She didn't see a child holding laminated ID cards and birthday money wrapped in a grandmother's handwritten note. No, what Barbara saw was a narrative she'd already built in her mind, and every action she took now was meant to enforce it. She had decided that Madison Brooks wasn't a student, wasn't a customer, wasn't someone worthy of being heard. She was a suspect. "I need 2 units at First Liberty Bank on South Clark." Barbara spoke firmly into her phone, turning her body slightly as if shielding herself from Madison's view would grant her moral cover. "Yes, possible fraud. Minor with cash, refusing to answer questions. Yes, she's being evasive." Madison sat stiffly in the chair, too stunned to move. The word evasive cut deeper than she expected. What had she refused to answer? What rule had she broken? Her palms were damp. Her voice caught in her throat. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said aloud. Not loud enough for the whole bank, just loud enough for herself. Barbara hung up the phone and turned back, folding her arms across her chest. "You're going to wait right here until the authorities arrive. You can explain your story to them." "Please," Madison whispered, "can I at least call my mom?" "Number." "You've already sent a message." "That's enough," Barbara snapped. "You're lucky I don't confiscate that phone right now." Just then, the bank doors opened with a mechanical swoosh. 2 officers stepped inside, one tall and broad-shouldered with graying temples, the other younger and taut with silent tension. Their navy blue uniforms immediately drew the attention of everyone in the lobby. Conversation ceased, phones lowered, customers paused mid-transaction. Officer Greg Walsh, a 17-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, led the way, scanning the room as if he'd just walked into a scene from a crime drama. Beside him was Officer Maria Santos, a younger patrolwoman with a resting expression that read more enforcement than empathy. Barbara raised her hand. "Over here." The officers approached. "This is the girl I called about," Barbara said confidently. "Name unknown, possibly false ID. Attempted to open an account with nearly $1,000 in questionable cash. She's not cooperating." Madison turned to them immediately. "I wasn't. I was just trying to open an account. I have my student ID, my birth certificate, the money's from my birthday. Please, just let me call my mom. Her name is Vanessa Brooks. She banks here too." Officer Walsh barely glanced at her. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." He nodded to Santos. Madison held out her folder of documents. Santos took it, flipping through. But her body language said everything. Not curiosity, not open-mindedness. Skepticism. "Where'd you get this cash, really?" Officer Walsh asked. "I already told everyone. From my family. My grandma gave me some, my uncles." "Yeah, sure," he interrupted. "This neighborhood's had reports of minors being used to run small cash laundering. You know anything about that?" Madison's mouth dropped open. "No, I don't even know what that means." Officer Santos gave Barbara a nod, a silent agreement in the language of adults who had already made up their minds. "She doesn't have a valid state ID," Barbara added helpfully. "She's 14, Madison said. "I'm not old enough to have one yet." Walsh reached into his belt and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal shimmered under the overhead lights. Madison flinched. "No, wait, you don't have to do that, please. I didn't steal anything." "You're being detained for questioning. Hands behind your back," Walsh said, unmoved. Several customers gasped audibly. A woman near the notary desk took out her phone and began filming. An older gentleman in a tweed cap stood up, as if to protest. Then slowly sat back down, his jaw clenched, but his voice silent. The cuffs clicked shut with a finality that sucked the air from the room. Madison's eyes filled with tears. Not loud sobs, but quiet, hot streams of disbelief and humiliation. "I didn't do anything," she repeated under her breath. Barbara, standing a few feet away, nodded approvingly. In her mind, she had done her job. She had protected her bank. But what she didn't know, what neither officer knew, was that this arrest was about to ignite something far bigger than policy or protocol. Across town, in the penthouse boardroom of Brooks Financial Holdings, Dr. Vanessa Brooks was staring at her phone. The message glowed on the screen. "Mom, they called the cops. I'm scared. Please come." Vanessa's knuckles turned white around the phone. Around her, executives fell into silence as they watched her transformation. From composed CEO to a mother in crisis. "This meeting is over," she said quietly, rising from her chair. "Someone just put their hands on my daughter." Back at the bank, Madison was being escorted through the lobby, her small frame in school uniform, her wrists cuffed behind her back, her eyes downcast. "Unbelievable," a woman whispered. A man at the ATM muttered, "This ain't right." But no one stepped forward. No one intervened. Officer Walsh was already speaking into his radio. "Juvenile female en route, age 14. Suspected financial fraud to be processed at the South District Precinct." Barbara watched from behind her desk, sipping lukewarm coffee as if this were just another Tuesday. To her, Madison was a lesson, a warning, a statistic. But in less than 20 minutes, she would learn exactly who Madison Brooks really was. And her own name would be dragged through headlines, legal documents, and every bias training manual in the industry. Because Dr. Vanessa Brooks was on her way, and she wasn't coming alone. On the 42nd floor of the Brooks Financial Holdings Tower, the temperature in the boardroom had dropped 10 degrees, or at least it felt like it. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't the central air. It was Dr. Vanessa L. Brooks, standing upright at the head of the long, polished table, her phone still glowing with her daughter's message. Her voice was calm. Her movements were precise. But those in the room, CFOs, regional vice presidents, senior strategists, knew the stillness was deceptive. They had seen her in countless negotiations, holding firm during billion-dollar mergers, calmly dismantling competitors with a single sentence. But this was different. Vanessa didn't speak with anger. She didn't need to. Instead, she said one line that sent shivers down every spine in the room. "Someone just put their hands on the wrong child." Her assistant, Marcy, stepped forward. "Should I call David Chen?" Vanessa interrupted, already walking toward the glass door. "And Robert Torres, right now." Downstairs, a black Bentley Mulsanne, polished like obsidian, pulled out from the parking garage. The license plate read BFH 0001, short for Brooks Financial Holdings, the kind of custom vanity tag that whispered power rather than shouted it. Inside, Vanessa sat in the back seat with her phone in one hand, her eyes locked on the screen. Her driver, James, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, are we heading to headquarters or First Liberty Bank? South Clark Street branch. Lighted up." Understood. He didn't need to ask what happened. Not with that tone. Within minutes, Vanessa was joined by David Chen, a sharp-suited litigation attorney whose hourly rate rivaled most people's monthly mortgage. He'd represented everyone from Fortune 500 firms to celebrity class action cases. And now, he was walking beside Vanessa with a leather folder tucked under one arm and fury tucked behind his gold-rimmed glasses. Also arriving was Robert Torres, a former Chicago police captain, now head of Brooks Family Security. He didn't say a word as he opened the rear door for Vanessa. His presence alone spoke volumes. Inside the car, Vanessa called her private contact at First Liberty Bank's board of directors, Charles Morrison. "Charles," she said, skipping all pleasantries, "I suggest you meet me at South Clark immediately. Your people have made a catastrophic error." "Vanessa, what happened?" he asked, startled. "They've arrested my daughter." The line went silent. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he finally said. "You have 10. Back at First Liberty Bank, Barbara Langston was straightening a stack of papers when the front doors swung open. The sound of heels clicking across marble echoed like a countdown. Customers turned. Conversations ceased. Even the security guard near the exit straightened his posture. Vanessa Brooks didn't walk. She entered. Like a storm with a designer wardrobe. She wore a steel gray power suit tailored to perfection. Her black hair swept into a tight chignon. Her pearl earrings, understated but unmistakably real, glinted with every step. She carried no purse, only a phone in one hand and a business card in the other. David Chen and Robert Torres flanked her, with 2 additional security aides quietly in tow. Barbara looked up from her desk, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then confusion, then calculation, and then arrogance. "Ma'am," she said, raising a brow, "we're in the middle of a situation here. You'll have to wait." Vanessa laid the business card on the counter, not tossed, not handed, placed, like a final chess move. Barbara glanced at it, then picked it up. "Dr. Vanessa L. Brooks, President and CEO, Brooks Financial Holdings, Inc. Or." She blinked, then blinked again. "I'm here for my daughter," Vanessa said softly. "Where's Madison Brooks?" Barbara's mouth opened, but no words came. "You had her detained, accused her of fraud, called the police, put her in handcuffs, over birthday money." I didn't know who. That's exactly the point." Behind Vanessa, David Chen spoke for the first time. "We will be filing immediate claims against the bank, its employees, and the officers involved for wrongful detainment, racial profiling, and emotional trauma. But before we proceed, where is the child?" Barbara's face had gone pale. She was taken by officers. They were just doing standard procedure. I thought the ID was fake." Vanessa's tone remained level. "Did you check the account? Did you verify the family name? The student ID from Winfield Charter Academy? The bank statements from this very institution?" "I didn't have access to all systems. You had access to her humanity," Vanessa snapped, "and you denied her even that." By now, a small crowd had formed. Customers, employees, even the other tellers had stepped out from their offices. Then the front doors opened again. Charles Morrison, chairman of the bank's board, rushed inside, his face flushed. He was in his 70s, silver-haired, and known citywide for his poise. But today, he looked shaken. "Vanessa," he said breathlessly, "I came as soon as I got your message." "She's been taken to juvenile processing," Vanessa replied coldly. "Because your employee here decided my 14-year-old daughter looked like a criminal." Morrison turned slowly to Barbara. "You what?" "I thought she had too much cash, no state ID." "She's 14, Morrison snapped. "Of course she doesn't have a driver's license." Vanessa turned away, her focus shifting. "Charles, I want access to every inch of this building's surveillance from the last 2 hours. I want her arresting officers identified. I want statements, and I want them now." "I'll get it," he said, pulling out his phone. "And Barbara Langston," she added, "I want her removed from this building, today." Barbara's knees nearly buckled. "This can't be happening." David Chen took a step forward. "Oh, it's not just happening. It's being recorded. By those cameras," he gestured overhead, "and by these witnesses, and it will be in court." 2 uniformed security officers approached. "Miss Langston," one said quietly, "you're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Please collect your things." Barbara opened her mouth to argue, but she caught Vanessa's stare, and the words died in her throat. She walked away, escorted, her heels scraping awkwardly across the marble floor. As the crowd murmured, Vanessa turned back to Morrison. "Where is Madison now?" "I've already called the precinct captain," he said. "They're holding her in temporary detainment. I've ordered her immediate release." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at her watch. "My daughter has never known what it feels like to be treated with hate for something she can't change," she said quietly. "Today, someone gave her that lesson. You better pray it's not one she remembers forever." Morrison nodded, looking 20 years older. "I'm so sorry, Vanessa. Truly." "I don't need sorry," she replied. "I need justice." 28 minutes later, Vanessa sat in the back of her car as it pulled up outside the South District Police Station. Robert Torres was already coordinating with precinct staff. David Chen stood at the front doors, phone to his ear, speaking with legal precision. And inside, Madison sat in a cold holding room, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red but dry now. She had stopped crying. Now she was just waiting. The door opened, and there, framed by fluorescent light and stone silence, stood her mother. Vanessa stepped forward and knelt in front of her daughter. "You're safe now," she whispered, holding Madison's face in her hands. "They will never do this to you again." And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Madison let herself believe it. The South District Police Station was quiet in that eerie, bureaucratic way only government buildings could be. Sterile walls, the faint hum of vending machines, and the echo of rubber soles against linoleum. It smelled like old paper and industrial coffee. But inside Holding Room 2, something far heavier hung in the air. Humiliation, confusion, and the suffocating weight of a broken trust. Madison Brooks sat motionless on a hard plastic bench. Her hands were no longer cuffed, but the sting around her wrists lingered, more emotional than physical. Her eyes, red from crying, stared at the floor as if it might offer answers. She'd always been told that if you were polite, honest, and prepared, the world would respond in kind. That lesson had been shredded by a bank manager, by 2 police officers, and by a system that had treated her like a criminal simply for being young, black, and alone. Then the door creaked open. A uniformed officer stood in the frame. "Your mother's here." Before Madison could process what that meant, Dr. Vanessa Brooks walked in. She didn't storm in like an angry parent. No shouting, no panic. That wasn't Vanessa's way. She moved like a glacier, silent, unstoppable, and unshakably powerful. The air around her seemed to tighten, as if even the walls understood who had just entered. Madison looked up and tried to stand, but Vanessa was already kneeling in front of her, placing both hands gently on her daughter's cheeks. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." Madison broke then, just a little. Not from weakness, but from sheer relief. Not even the strongest child can carry that kind of fear without it cracking. Outside the room, Vanessa turned to find Captain Theodore Langley, the precinct commander, waiting nervously with 2 detectives behind him. He recognized her immediately. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes. She'd testified before the Senate Banking Committee. Her name was etched on every donation plaque in the city's most elite schools and hospitals. "I'd like a word," Vanessa said, her tone even and absolute. He cleared his throat. "Of course, Dr. Brooks. My office, please." They walked past desks stacked with reports and overworked patrol officers. In Langley's office, Vanessa sat calmly across from him, flanked by her attorney, David Chen, and her head of security, Robert Torres. Langley's hands trembled slightly as he offered coffee, which Vanessa ignored. "Would you like to begin?" Chen asked. Or shall we? Langley shifted. This was a miscommunication. The officers responded to a call from the bank. The child, Miss Brooks, was alone with a large amount of cash. Our officers followed standard protocol. No, Vanessa interrupted. Your officers followed assumptions. There it was. Cold, sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. She presented identification. She had bank statements. She asked to call her mother. She was respectful and compliant. And she was handcuffed, Captain Langley, at 14 years old. I understand how that must have felt. No, Captain, David Chen said smoothly. You don't understand, but you're about to. He placed a folder on the desk and slid it across. Inside was a printed timeline of Madison's arrest, screenshots of text messages, a copy of the bank surveillance footage, already acquired via legal channels, and initial witness statements from customers who had started coming forward after the incident. Langley scanned the pages, his face paling by the second. Vanessa didn't raise her voice once. This wasn't just a bad call. This was systemic failure, and it has a price. The captain nodded slowly. I'll authorize her immediate release and arrange an official apology. But I hope you'll allow Internal Affairs to conduct a full investigation. You won't have a choice, Chen said. We'll be issuing a public statement within the hour. Langley looked exhausted. Is there anything I can do now? Yes, Vanessa said. I want her records expunged immediately. I want the arrest removed from every system, not pending review, not after paperwork, now. I'll make the call myself. You'll make several, she added. Because when this goes public, and it will, I want your office to have something to show for it. While that storm brewed behind closed doors, another was rolling into First Liberty Bank. Charles Morrison, chairman of the board, stood in the executive conference room staring at a monitor. A young IT staffer had wheeled in the security playback system. Around the room were several senior managers, 2 attorneys from the bank's legal department, and the head of HR. They were watching the entire encounter between Barbara Langston and Madison unfold, raw, unfiltered, and time-stamped. It wasn't just the arrest. It was Barbara's tone from the first second Madison walked up, the disbelief in her voice, the way she waved away the birthday card, the moment she muttered, "People like you." And then came the real blow, footage from previous months, dozens of interactions. Barbara giving white customers a smile and no problem when they lacked documents, then turning cold and confrontational when Black or Latino customers approached, demanding additional proof, escalating minor issues. It was a pattern. Morrison whispered, "My God, how long has this been going on?" One attorney murmured, "Too long, sir. And it's on our watch." An hour later, Madison and Vanessa stepped out of the precinct. Camera crews had begun arriving, tipped off by a viral live stream that had captured Madison's arrest. Jada Simmons, a college student who had been in the bank lobby earlier, had filmed everything, and it was already spreading online. Vanessa didn't speak to the cameras. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. They returned to the bank, not for money, not for vengeance, but for truth. In the lobby, Morrison waited near the main desk. When he saw them, he walked over and greeted Vanessa like the old friend he once was. "Vanessa, I don't know how to express—" "Then don't," she said. "Just show me the footage." They returned to the conference room. The lights dimmed. The playback began again. Madison watched herself on screen, standing patiently, smiling, being dismissed, accused, threatened, crying. She flinched when she saw the moment the cuffs were locked behind her back. Vanessa sat stone-faced, but her fists were clenched tight in her lap. When the footage ended, no one spoke. It was Morrison who finally broke the silence. "I'm ashamed," he said. "This isn't just one employee. This is a culture we allowed to fester, and it ends today." Vanessa stood. It should have ended the moment she asked to call her mother. She turned to Morrison. "Your next move decides whether this bank survives with dignity or becomes a national disgrace." Morrison nodded. "Barbara Langston is gone, permanently. A full internal audit is underway. Every employee will undergo mandatory bias and accountability training. And I've already allocated funds for a scholarship in Madison's name," David Chen interjected, "and will be seeking damages." "Of course," Morrison said quickly. But Vanessa raised a hand. "We'll get to that. What I want first is reform, not just PR fluff, real change." Morrison met her gaze. "You have my word." She nodded once. Then she turned to her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, Maddie, let's go home." Madison hesitated. "Can we open the account first?" Vanessa blinked, surprised. "You still want to?" Madison squared her shoulders. "Yes, but not just for me. For every kid who looks like me and walks into a bank someday, I want them to be treated right." Vanessa smiled, small, proud. "Then let's do it." Barbara Langston sat at the edge of her bed the next morning, still in yesterday's blazer and slacks, staring at the carpet like it might suddenly lift its fibers and explain how everything had fallen apart so quickly. She hadn't slept. Not really. After all, it's hard to rest when your name is trending on social media under hashtags like #bank while black, #justice for Madison, and worse, #Barbara Langston fired. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd felt proud. Proud for following protocol, proud for protecting her bank, and certainly proud for not being fooled by a teenager with a pocket full of cash and a story that sounded too polished to be real. But now she was radioactive. She glanced at her phone. 57 missed calls. Her email? Locked out. Her company badge? Deactivated. The LinkedIn page she had cultivated for over 15 years, full of certificates in diversity leadership and customer care excellence, was now flooded with angry comments, each one louder and more damning than the last. And the final blow? A voicemail from Charles Morrison, chairman of First Liberty Bank, left at 2:03 a.m., delivered in a tone colder than a Chicago winter. "Barbara, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Your conduct yesterday represents a gross violation of bank ethics and policy. You are permanently barred from all First Liberty Bank locations and functions. Legal counsel will follow up regarding severance and final documentation." No apology, no opportunity to explain, just an ending, swift and absolute. By 9 a.m., Barbara's office had been cleared out. 2 security officers, the same ones who had stood idly by as she called the police on Madison Brooks, were now overseeing the collection of her belongings. They did not speak to her. They didn't need to. Their silence was its own form of judgment. Into a cardboard box went her framed Employee of the Year award from 2016, a faux crystal paperweight with the words "Excellence in Service," and a handful of family photos. Her husband, her 2 sons, a black lab named Tucker, innocent faces frozen in time, unaware that their lives were now touched by a decision made in less than 10 minutes. Barbara stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching as her career was packed away like an afterthought. As she exited the building for the last time, no one said goodbye. A few glanced her way, some with pity, some with anger. Others just turned away. Outside, a camera crew stood on the sidewalk. She flinched. A young woman with a mic called her name. "Miss Langston, Would you like to comment on the wrongful arrest of Madison Brooks?" Barbara kept walking. She didn't have the strength to speak and knew that anything she said would only make it worse. Meanwhile, inside First Liberty Bank, the real work had begun. Chairman Morrison, shaken by the weight of what had unfolded, convened an emergency meeting of the executive board. The footage had made it undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a systemic failure, a cultural rot that had gone unchecked for years. Every employee, from branch tellers to regional managers, would now be required to complete 60 hours of racial sensitivity and de-escalation training. Not a quick online module, not a lunch and learn. Real, in-person, certified instruction, including role play, case studies, and accountability assessments. All staff files would be reviewed for past customer complaints, especially those related to discriminatory behavior. Anonymous tip lines were activated. Former employees were contacted. Within days, a disturbing number of consistent stories emerged. Barbara hadn't just been harsh with Madison. She had made jokes about certain zip codes. She'd asked for extra documentation from Black and Latino clients, while approving loans and account changes for white customers with half the paperwork. She had dismissed complaints, reprimanded employees for coddling troublemakers, told one staff member to watch your tone with a Black customer who had dared to question a fee. All of it had been whispered for years. Now it was being shouted. At the same time, Officer Greg Walsh and Officer Maria Santos, the two who arrested Madison, were placed under immediate suspension, pending a full investigation by Chicago PD's Internal Affairs Division. It wasn't just about that one arrest. Investigators pulled their body cam footage, reviewed incident reports, cross-referenced patterns across years of arrests. The results were damning. Officer Walsh had detained Black youth at a rate nearly 4 times higher than any of his precinct colleagues. In 67% of those cases, no charges were ever filed. His reports were peppered with phrases like appeared aggressive or non-compliant, often about minors who, footage showed, had done nothing more than ask questions or express fear. Officer Santos had a shorter career but a troubling trend. Her use of physical force, including handcuffing and verbal escalation, skewed heavily against Hispanic and African American juveniles, often in low-level situations involving no criminal intent. Community activists who had long pushed for reform seized the moment. Protests gathered outside precincts. Petitions circulated. And Madison's name became more than just a case. It became a cause. And yet, in the middle of all this noise, Madison Brooks stayed quiet. She spent the days that followed mostly at home, resting, journaling, speaking occasionally with reporters her mother approved. She had returned to school quietly, no fanfare, just a few hugs, a handful of whispered, "We're so sorry," and one teacher who told her with tears in her eyes, "You didn't deserve that." But her mind kept replaying the moment, the cuffs, the cold bank floor, the way Barbara had stared at her like she was invisible and dangerous at the same time. Until the moment Madison asked her mother a question that stopped Vanessa in her tracks. "Will this happen to other kids?" Vanessa didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat beside her daughter and took her hand. "Not if I have anything to do with it." 2 weeks later, at a press conference held on the steps of the Chicago Financial Equity Center, Vanessa announced the launch of the Madison Brooks Initiative. It would provide free legal aid to families dealing with discrimination in banks, teach financial literacy to youth, and create the first national certification program for banks to be recognized as bias-free financial institutions. The initiative was immediately funded with $10 million from the Brooks Family Foundation, and within days, over a dozen banks signed on to begin the certification process. Madison didn't want to speak at first, but when she did, her words were quiet, measured, and unforgettable. "I'm not a hero, I'm not a victim, I'm just a kid who wanted to open a bank account. I didn't ask for this story, but maybe someone else needs it. Maybe next time when a young person walks into a bank with their savings, they'll be treated like a customer, not a suspect." As for Barbara Langston, the banking industry is small, and it has a long memory. Word of her conduct spread fast. HR directors flagged her resume. Recruiters ghosted her. Even insurance firms, real estate offices, and consulting firms, once safe fallbacks, began closing their doors to her. By month's end, Barbara found herself applying to part-time retail jobs. One manager recognized her from the news and politely said, "We're going in a different direction." Her pride, once ironclad, began to rust. She tried to file a defamation lawsuit. It went nowhere. She tried to issue a public apology. It was drowned out by calls for deeper change. And so, Barbara Langston became a cautionary tale. Not just for banks, for every gatekeeper who thinks they can hide behind policy when they act out of prejudice. 3 weeks after her arrest, Madison Brooks returned to First Liberty Bank, not as a scared teenager, but as a young woman with purpose. She walked through the same glass doors where her dignity had been stolen and reclaimed her space. Her mother, Dr. Vanessa Brooks, walked beside her, poised and proud, but this time she let Madison lead. This was her moment now. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The marble still gleamed, the scent of polished wood lingered, but now there was something new in the air. Accountability. A young banker in a gray vest greeted her with genuine warmth. "Miss Brooks," he said, "we've prepared a special welcome for you." They walked her to a newly created youth banking services desk, an area designed specifically for teen clients, staffed by professionals trained to listen, not judge. Madison opened her account in under 10 minutes. No questions about her cash. No suspicion in the teller's eyes. Just clear, respectful service, the way it should have been from the start. She left the bank that day not only with a checking account, but with something far more powerful. A story that had forced an industry to change. In the following months, the Madison Brooks Initiative grew into a national movement. It launched youth financial literacy programs in over 50 schools, created legal support networks for families facing banking discrimination, and established a 24/7 helpline that received over 1,200 calls in its first month. Banks across the country rushed to adopt equity certification standards, not just for PR, but because customers were demanding it. The initiative also partnered with credit unions, financial institutions, and civil rights organizations to produce a public report titled "Banking While Black: The Hidden Hurdles," exposing nationwide patterns of implicit bias in customer service, loan approvals, and account access. It became mandatory reading at 3 major banking conferences. And it all started with one girl, one envelope, one moment that could have ended in silence, but didn't. Meanwhile, the Chicago Police Department, under pressure from both the public and the city council, began a sweeping overhaul of its policies related to youth interactions and racial bias. Officers were required to complete bias training every quarter, with a focus on de-escalation, implicit judgment, and communication with minors. Madison's name was invoked in these trainings, not as a symbol of failure, but as a reminder of what can happen when the system forgets its duty to protect rather than punish. But the most powerful change happened quietly, in living rooms and dinner tables across the country. Parents began telling their children Madison's story, not just as a warning, but as a lesson in resilience, in dignity, in the difference between having power and using it well. Vanessa Brooks knew this intimately. She had spent years shielding Madison from the darker realities of the world, believing that protection was love. But she had come to realize something deeper. True love doesn't just shield, it prepares. So, she gave Madison not just comfort, but tools. Not just justice, but voice. And Madison rose to meet that challenge. She began speaking at youth summits, churches, and even elementary schools, delivering a message that was both simple and transformative. You are not a threat, you are a future. That message spread. It was printed on T-shirts, murals, and social media posts. One of Madison's speeches, filmed at a youth conference in Atlanta, went viral. In it, she said, "I didn't ask to be a headline, but since I am, I'm going to make sure the headline leads to a better story for someone else." As for Dr. Vanessa Brooks, her role in this saga didn't end at the bank or the police station. She became an architect of reform. Using her wealth and influence, she led a coalition of CEOs and civic leaders to push for federal legislation requiring bias accountability protocols in financial institutions nationwide. They called it the Fair Access Banking Act, and within 1 year, it had bipartisan backing. And yet she never made herself the center of the story. When asked in an interview what had driven her, Vanessa simply said, "My daughter was treated like she was nothing. I used everything I had to remind the world that she's everything." In the final months of that year, Madison sat in the same office where Vanessa had received the emergency text that changed everything. This time, there were no alarms, no chaos, just the quiet hum of strategy meetings, outreach planning, and progress. Vanessa looked over at her daughter, now a student intern at Brooks Financial, scribbling notes, listening attentively, and occasionally asking the kinds of questions that made executives lean forward. She smiled. Power, she thought, wasn't about control. It wasn't about titles or money. It was about what you chose to do when the world gave you the microphone. And Madison, without fear, without hate, had chosen to speak. Would you have stood up for a stranger if you saw injustice happening in front of you? If Madison's story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, don't scroll past. Hit the like button to show your support for fairness. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or a similar experience. Your voice might help someone else feel seen. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss another real-life story that reminds us all. Justice isn't automatic, it's a choice. And it starts with people like you.